in a single graph. So when we look at the consumer surplus and producer surplus from the perspective of a market model, we will start realizing how important these two concepts are. Because what we're going to do today is we're going to make really important conclusions about what market equilibrium can get us. And the conclusion will be that market equilibrium really allows us to have efficient allocation of resources. Through market equilibrium, we can achieve efficiency, both from the consumer side and from the producer side. And we are going to prove that by showing that at the market equilibrium, the sum of the producer surplus and the consumer surplus are maximum. Which means that anytime the market is not in equilibrium, the total benefit going to the consumer and producer is not maximized. Hence, our market equilibrium achieves the efficiency in our economy. Okay, so that's the idea. Before we move on, let us remind ourselves the basic definition of what consumer surplus is. The definition is important, and the interpretation of consumer surplus and producer surplus is also important. So, consumer surplus measures the net benefit, as we mentioned before, and producer surplus measures the net benefit to the producers. Consumer surplus measures the net benefit to consumers, and producer surplus measures the net benefit to the producers. We looked at a bunch of questions which I'm going to skip for the time being, and then we are going to directly move on to the issue of efficiency in our economy. Efficiency is very, important to us. And when we think about efficiency in a market, there are predominantly two ways to understand this. What I want you guys to do is skip this. Okay? Forget about the first approach. The way they're explaining this particular PowerPoint slide has several serious mistakes. We're going to identify some of those. Ignore the first way efficiency is being described, because it doesn't really sometimes make sense. We're going to say in a very simplistic way, and I think it's in a very sound way, that market equilibrium will be efficient if it can maximize the sum of the economic surplus of the economy. What is the sum of the economic surplus? The sum of the or economic surplus? Economic surplus is the sum of consumer surplus and producer surplus. Okay? And what we are going to do, we are going to focus on this idea of economic surplus, which comes from the sum of consumer surplus and producer surplus. And what we will try to do is we will always try to maximize this economic surplus. Why is this an important idea? This is important because from a market perspective, we should not pay attention to whether only the buyer is benefiting or whether the producer is benefiting. Sometimes due to changes prices, some people will be worse off, let's say buyer, and some group will be better off, like a producer. But from the efficiency perspective, we really do not, we are not biased towards any group. We want to maximize the total surplus of the economy. That takes us to a more refined definition of economic efficiency, and the definition will be in your next exam. What we are going to start talking about, so important for exam 2. So what we are going to do now is we are going to from now on talk about economic efficiency rather than this broader idea of efficiency, because sometimes when we talk about only efficiency, we tend to miss out some of the implications. So we are going to have I think more conventional measurement of economic efficiency, which, to begin with, is a market outcome. Please highlight the word outcome, meaning that we are talking about output. And this is a very important philosophical standpoint. When we are thinking about how to achieve economic efficiency, we are basically not interested about what price we are paying for that good. Because prices sometimes really do not reflect the true nature of efficiency. So I want to go a couple of steps back and remind ourselves as to why efficiency is such an important question in economics. The reason why we are so much fascinated with the idea of efficiency is because we have scarcity of resources. Since our resources are limited, we want to find the best possible utilization of our resources. I think I have mentioned this sentence at least like 50 times now. But I will continue to do that because this is an important statement. So since we are interested in allocation of resources, we want to make sure our resources are properly utilized. That is directly connected with how much output we produce. Are we all clear on that? Sometimes you might misleadingly connect the idea of efficiency to the price that you are paying in the marketplace. And that's a very misleading way of thinking about efficiency. To explain this philosophical point, I want to ask two questions and I want to get your feedback on this. Let's say you are in a marketplace. Okay? Let's say you are looking at the price of automobiles and you are seeing that over time the price of automobiles are going down, because that's true, by the way. If you look at the relative price of your automobiles, they have literally gone down. Are we all clear on that? In 1964, a Chevy sedan used to cost about $4,000. Now in 2016, it's cost about $30,000. But still, we are claiming that the price of a Chevy sedan has gone down. Are we all clear on why? Because our income has also gone up. In 1964, $4,000 is to mean a lot of money, right? Okay. Now, does that mean that we are? So, what do we infer about price? What can we infer about efficiency just by looking at the price? I think the more another question that I think all of us regularly seeing is that the price of computers are going down. Isn't that right? Does that mean that the production of computers are becoming more efficient? How do we know that? Right? It would be just sometimes, if you are a macroeconomist, you would argue that when the price of something is going down, it could mean a variety of factors. It could mean that there are more competition in the world market. As a result, we know that competition increases efficiency. Then the other argument could be that if there is a lot of demand in the world market, every country is producing just computers. That's why you are seeing a lot of competition, and that's why the price of computers are going down. Now, is it good for an economy to produce only computers? Well, it is good if you have some kind of competitive advantage, something that we learned before. But what if you don't have competitive advantage, but still you want to produce only computers? That would be inefficient allocation of resources. So prices sometimes really can send us misleading information about economic efficiency. So just to be on the safe side, we are going to look at efficiency based on how much output we are producing. And we will have some idea about how much output our economy can produce. And if sometimes that level of production is hurt by some kind of government regulations or by some kind of economic events, we are going to see changes in the level of output, and we should use those changes in level of output as a way to figure out what is happening to our efficiency. A lot of words. We are going to explain all of these in the next 10 minutes. But I just wanted to make sure that we understand that our discussion about economic efficiency is entirely about output and not about price. Because price could be anything. Sometimes prices are distorted. They do not really reflect the level of efficiency in an economy. So, if that is the case, we are looking at an output where the sum of the consumer surplus and the producer surplus is maximum. Simple idea. Okay? Why is it a simple idea? Because in a minute, when we bring our full market model, we bring our consumer surplus demand curve, we bring our supply curve, we find a market equilibrium price of $2. We find the market equilibrium price of $2. we see that at that $2 price, the output that is being produced and the output that is being bought is 15,000. This is an arbitrary market. Please don't worry about the quantities. The measurement of the quantities are irrelevant. So you have an equilibrium quantity of 15,000. You have an equilibrium price of $2. We really don't know what this means, but they are equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And we're going to say that, so notice that at this market equilibrium price of $2 and more importantly at the market equilibrium quantity of 15,000, we can now measure our consumer surplus and producer surplus. I want to move back a little bit, move to the next slide. And at 15,000 units of output and at equilibrium price of $2, the upper triangle, the blue one, is our consumer surplus, and the lower triangle, the pink one, is our producer surplus. So our economic efficiency is the sum of these two triangles, which by itself is a triangle, right? Now, what we're going to do now is show that anytime the market is not in equilibrium, the size of this economic surplus, the size of the producer surplus plus the size of the consumer surplus will always be smaller. Will always be smaller, which means we're going to show in a minute that in market equilibrium, the size of the consumer surplus and the producer surplus that you are looking at right now is the largest. If that is the case, then market equilibrium actually maximizes the economic surplus of the economy, and therefore it is efficient, economically efficient. Let's explore this idea today. I want to go. I had an sort of like intuition that I will try to cover this chapter fairly quickly. Then I realized that this chapter is going to talk about two kinds of government interventions, which are traditionally discussed in two different chapters. So I will spend another day, probably on Monday, to finish this. So today we are going to only talk about the first component of how government intervention affects this. So in order to do that, I want to go back one slide and imagine that rather than the market price being at $2 and the market equilibrium quantity being at 15,000, our market price is somehow at $2.20. Okay, so if the market price is somehow $2.20, notice that this is not an equilibrium price, right? So at that equilibrium price, non-equilibrium price, the amount that consumers want to buy is 14,000. We are finding that from their demand curve. And the amount that producer wants to sell at that price is about 16,000. I'm not going to highlight that at this point. Okay? Now, there are two ways of looking at this. Okay? Way one. Okay? I'm going to look at this quantity, 14,000, and try to understand at this output level whether consumer surplus and producer surplus is maximum or not. Because I am looking at the idea of efficiency from an output perspective. So I am looking at 14,000 unit, an arbitrary quantity in the market, and I'm asking myself, is this output level maximizing my consumer surplus plus my producer surplus? Are we all clear on the question? What I see is that there are two things happening at the 14,000 level of output. First of all, I have learned from previous chapter that my demand curve is nothing but my marginal benefit curve, and my supply curve is nothing but my marginal cost curve. And at 14,000 level of output, at 14K, my marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost. My marginal benefit is $2.20. That is what is indicated by my demand curve. And my marginal cost at that output level is $1.80. Do we all say that? We are going to each of the curve and we are finding out how much the marginal cost and the marginal benefit is at that level. Okay? You can either look at it from a marginal benefit, marginal cost perspective. I guess that's the best way, right? So what happens when the marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost? So people like the benefit that a person gets by buying this good is higher than the cost that it incurs for the producer. So when marginal benefit of a certain level of output is greater than marginal cost, what do you think should happen? Anyone?
Increase the cost.
I didn't understand that. So increase the cost. How do you increase the cost?
Have the price of the good increase so that way you'll decrease the overall demand so it'll reach equilibrium.
Okay. So let's go back to this idea again. Right? So I am looking at an output level 14,000. I am seeing that at that output level, the marginal benefit people are getting, consumers are getting, is higher than the marginal cost of the production. So what can we first say about 14,000 output level? Is this output sufficient for our economy? You should see clearly that when there is a 14,000 level of output, marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost. So the buyers are really hungry for this good, right? They are saying that, produce more and we are going to buy more. Are we all clear? Do we understand that? So what we regularly, label this 14,000 level of output is that it is under production. It is the level of production that is not sufficient to really satisfy our buyers. Or the level of production that we are looking at, $14,000 unit, at that output level, marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost, which means that there are more demand for the goods than supply. As a result, this is under production, so production should be increased. So that's the kind of signal this 14,000 level of output is going to send to our producers. Notice that the producers, when they look at 14,000 units of output that they are producing and compare the marginal benefit and marginal cost, realize that if they produce more, consumers will buy more because they are willing to pay higher than what the producers are willing to charge. Do we all see that? Do you all see that? Now I want to ask a critical question, and I will not be surprised if you cannot answer this question. So at 14,000 units of output, who has a higher bargaining power?
Producer.
Why?
Because there's not enough and people want it bad because it's so cheap.
Okay. Do we all agree with him that when the output is under production, there is less production being made than people willing to buy? At an under production level, our producers have kind of like a higher bargaining power because so in what sense do you think that the bargaining power really could work out in favor of our producer? What we have learned in the previous chapter is that when somebody has a higher bargaining power, he or she or they want to really satisfy their own objective. The objective of the consumer is to buy as much as possible by paying as little as possible. The objective of the producer is to sell as much as possible by charging as much as possible. Are we all clear on that? Now, if we argue that what he said makes sense, then at this underproduction level, our producers have a higher bargaining power. How are they going to exploit that power?
Jack up the price.
Are they doing that? They're not, by the way. Right? Because the consumers were willing to pay $2.20, and as our producers start producing more, the market price actually goes down. Do you see that? Are we all clear on that? So, why would a producer be willing to produce more by charging a lower price? Do you see what's happening here? We said that the market price is $2.20. At that price level, consumers' marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost. So we are saying that our producer has a higher bargaining power, so he expands his production, but that at the end ends up lowering the price. So what's the benefit? What is the benefit of our producer to expand production? Why doesn't he create a excess underproduction situation and be happy with it? Yes.
People will buy more because it's cheap.
Okay. It sounds a trivial statement at this point of time. In about 2 chapters from now, we will say that probably is one of the most important, or way from actual things, right? So, I'm going to rephrase our discussion about bargaining power in a marketplace. I'm going to rephrase the bargaining power statement by saying that in a marketplace, a consumer tries to maximize his benefit or satisfaction, sometimes which is called utility. We will look at a little bit glimpse on that idea. The idea is very complicated, but we will have an extensive discussion about what the firm wants to do in a market. And what a firm wants to do is a firm wants to maximize their profit. And profit is a quantitative measure, a difference between how much they get from the market by selling and charging a price and the cost of their production. And we're going to say that in a standard competitive market, a producer always have an incentive to produce more, because if they produce more, they can get more revenue. If they get more revenue, they can maximize their profit. So a slight reinterpretation of the bargaining power idea in a market setup, but it still satisfies our objective that through the bargaining power, the buyer and the seller gets what they want. The buyer gets the maximum satisfaction from whatever he's buying, and the producer simply maximizes their profit. So again, coming back to our graph, when we have underproduction, our underproduction really puts a downward pressure on the market. It tells the market that more has to be produced, and if more is produced, prices automatically goes down until we come to the market equilibrium where production stops. At market equilibrium of 15,000, there is no underproduction, and the consumer is happy to pay the price that the producer is willing to accept. So there is no mismatch between the price. Now, if we delete all these graphical stuff and look at this from a slightly different perspective, we know that at the market equilibrium, the consumer surplus of the consumer is the big triangle. The producer surplus is the lower big triangle. And so that's the consumer surplus and the producer surplus that we receive when the market is in equilibrium. When the market is not in equilibrium, let's say at $2.20, the consumer surplus is this area. Do we all see that? And the producer surplus is this area. Do we all see that? I apologize. The producer surplus is that area, because the producer surplus is the area below the market price and above the supply curve. So it's going to be that area. So it's going to be 1, it's going to be 2, and it's going to be 3. These are all producer surplus. Right? So when the market is not in equilibrium, at underproduction, we should see clearly that our consumer is losing a major part of his surplus. Right? Our consumer, I want to be a little bit formal about this. I guess we can look at this one. Okay? This is much, much cleaner. So notice that when the market equilibrium was at $2, the consumer surplus was the area A plus B plus C. A plus B plus C, and the producer surplus at equilibrium was D plus E, right? The lower triangle and the upper triangle. So that's one. When there is an underproduction, let's say at $2.20, your consumer surplus is just area A, and your producer surplus is B plus D, right? Okay, so what just happened? When we move from 1 to 2, when we move from a market equilibrium to a price where the market is not in equilibrium of $2.20, notice that our consumer is losing B plus C. Do you see that? Our consumer is losing B plus C, and our producer originally had D plus E, now they have B plus D. So the analysis of the producer is kind of interesting, right?